Welcome all our viewers to the first Chico Steak California podcast, Lifescapes. I will be interviewing Laurie Meyer. She's a longtime Chico resident, and she's loved and admired by many. So without further ado, welcome Laurie Meyer.
Well, thank you, Janice. It's an honor to be here with you tonight.
It's an honor to have you and a privilege for everyone to get to know you.
Oh, thank you. You're kind.
So, when did your family first move to Chico, and can you tell us a little bit about the circumstances around that?
Certainly. I'm happy to. My family moved to Chico in 1956, which is way before I was born. And it was a hot July day. My dad worked for Red River Lumber Company in Westwood, and they owned the whole town, and they had gone bankrupt. And so they had to find a place to move. They bought a house. My mother had never seen it in Chico. They paid $11,000 for that house.
Did they argue about the house or anything, or did she describe it or anything? Or?
I think that only my dad saw it, and she was just happy to have a place to live because the town, everybody had to move out.
So she was not a whiner?
Not a whiner, no. The house was too small for their family of 7. It was a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house and had a very small kitchen. It cost $11,000, like I said. They had saved for a down payment. My dad made $2.10 an hour, and they saved $5,000 for a down payment on the house. And they came here in July wearing flannel-lined jeans and just about melted, but we're happy to be here.
What do you think the temperature might have been about that time?
Well, having lived through many Julys in Chico, I would say well over 100 degrees.
Yes.
With flannel-lined jeans.
Ooh, they had no idea?
No idea. So that's how we started here in Chico.
What kind of things did your family do together when you moved here? Well, it'd have to be after you were born then, right?
Yes. Almost a decade later.
Oh.
So I remember my dad traveling around the countryside fixing machinery and restaurant equipment, and he would come home at 10 or 11 at night with 9 lugs of peaches or 11 lugs of tomatoes, and he'd wake everybody up. We got a can. And everybody would get out of bed that was living at home at the time, and we would start canning. And we'd can until we were done, and peeling and pitting and bottling and pressure cooking.
Did they ever get tired of peaches?
Well, he'd bring home pears the next week.
Excellent.
Tomatoes the week after. Ooh. So there was always something to can. I also remember on Saturday nights, Lawrence Welk would play, and my parents would dance either the waltz or the polka, and we'd cheer and laugh, and my siblings would pair up because they were quite a bit older than I was, and they would dance too and trade off with Mom and Dad. Everybody thought that was great fun. I also remember Cliff and Nella Watts. My parents told stories of them bringing over bags of fruits and vegetables off their tree in their garden just to help my parents survive in Chico that very first year. I'm not sure they'd have made it without Cliff and Nella Watts.
Now, are the Watts that you're talking about, are they related to all the other Watts here in Chico?
Oh, yes. They're some of the beginning Wattses that lived in Chico. So
Many
Cliff and
Wattses.
Nella are Charlie Watts' parents and Kayleen Boone's parents. And the funny thing is Cliff and my mother, Lola Seipert, were good friends after that. And now my son, Jack, is married to Cliff and Nella's granddaughter, Stevie. Aww. So that family love has continued. And our granddaughter is named Lola Jane after Nella Jane Watts and Lola Seipert.
And that's your mother?
That's my mother, yes.
She was a wonderful woman.
Well, thank you. I think the world of her.
And a trooper.
She was.
So where did you go to school, including college?
I started out at Citrus Elementary School. Mrs. Moorhead was my kindergarten teacher. And then I went to Bidwell Junior High School and Pleasant Valley High School. Where I went to college, now that's a story. I was planning to go to BYU in Provo, and I received a scholarship. I bought a car. I had a job. I had an apartment with my best friend, Shelley Tyner at the time, and I was all set to go.
Is that Kay Tyner's
It
family?
is. Kay and Dwight Tyner's family, their daughter. I was all set to go, and I had been praying about which school to go to all of my senior year, and had not really gotten an answer, or I didn't recognize the answer. Maybe that was the key. I'm not sure.
How do you receive answers? Do you remember? I mean,
Well, I receive sudden ideas. That's how I receive answers. Just an idea hits my brain, and I know the answer. Well, I was cleaning my car because I was going to leave in a week to go back to BYU Provo, and I was cleaning under the steering column. I don't know why I thought I had to clean under the steering column, but I did. And I was under the steering column, and I received an answer. And it said clearly, "You need to stay in Chico." And I was so excited to receive an answer, and I ran into the house and told my parents.
was it a warm feeling that came over
Oh,
you?
so warm and so positive and so calming. And things with my college education was a nightmare because I hadn't even applied at Chico State yet. And so where was I going to go? I didn't know if Chico State would even let me in. And so I ran into the house, I told my parents, and they said, "Oh, we're so glad that you're going to stay here." And that was a Saturday evening. Monday morning, I went down to Chico State, and I asked them if I could come in the fall a week later, and they said, "Well, do you have your transcripts?" And I went and got them, and the transcripts from PV, and brought them over to Chico State, and they said, "Yes, come on in. We're happy to have you." I also had a scholarship to Chico
That's
State.
what I heard. I heard you had a scholarship. So you turned that down thinking you needed to go to BYU.
I hadn't turned it down yet. I didn't have an answer, so I hadn't turned down.
Excellent.
But I hadn't applied to Chico State either. I probably should have done that. Anyway, it all worked out, and I stayed in Chico.
What a blessing.
Answers come. Just
Everything
takes time.
came after that, too. What was your favorite hangout when you were in college?
Student Ward was an active place when I was in college. There were both singles and married in
How many
Student Ward.
people in the ward?
Oh, probably over 100.
Wow.
We had a great time. I remember hanging out at the Institute building. Everybody'd show
Is
up.
that where you had church? Was the Institute building?
Yes. They'd open that curtain, and that we'd hold sacrament meeting, and then they'd pull the curtain across, and we'd have Relief Society and priesthood, and we even had a primary. I was the primary president for a short time, and we held primary in the kitchen. That was a great
In
place.
that little kitchen?
In that little kitchen. There was only one or two children. But yeah, we hung out at the Institute building and did all kinds of things. We also hung out at the Donut Nook on East Avenue. We would go order donuts and more donuts and more donuts and play Uno until all hours of the night.
And they didn't kick you out?
No, because we kept buying donuts. It was okay. And those same round stools are there today that we sat on all those many years ago. The other place we hung out was Caper Acres. Well, I hate to say this. We jumped the fence.
Well, you were not teenagers. Well,
Oh, I think I
college.
was. Yeah.
I mean, jumping the fence is nothing, right?
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we jumped the fence then, and we'd go play hide and seek in Caper Acres till all hours of the night, and then end up at Denny's eating French fries. We had a good time.
What time did you get home?
Do I have to tell that?
What would your mom say? Did they guys think, "Oh, she's with"? How did that go?
They were very trusting. You see, my siblings broke them all in. So there was 5 older than me, and they were used to all kinds of shenanigans. So they.
And you always made good choices. So.
I tried. I did my best. I made my mistakes, but I tried.
How did you decide to be a nurse?
Well, in high school, I wanted to teach math. I loved math. I used to tell everybody I dreamt in X and Y. Algebra was the language I spoke. And then I got to calculus, and that was a whole nother language, and I hated it. And I knew
I don't blame you.
I knew I had to do
It's not my
something
forte.
else. I was working at Mangrove Medical Group from the time I was 15 and a half, and I started hanging out with all those nurses, and they were telling me all the things that they liked about being a nurse, and you should become a nurse, and I decided to be a nurse. So that's what my major was at Chico State.
Anything significant while you were a student, a nurse, and trying to get that degree? And
Yes. There's one memory of nursing school that stands out above the rest. There's theory, that's the classroom work of nursing school, and then there's the clinical portion of nursing school where we go to the hospital and practice our skills. My very first day of clinical, my very first semester was at Feather River Hospital in Paradise. we got up at 5 o'clock in the morning to be there on time. And I remember being so nervous. And my first rotation was surgery. That was the first thing I went to.
Are you okay with blood and guts?
Well, I thought so. Let me tell you.
It goes on, right?
I know.
Can't wait.
Well, I recognized the doctor, the surgeon that day. It was Dr. Bruce Tall Sr., and he recognized me. And he said, let's scrub her in. And that means I had to scrub my hands and
You mean before you were just going to stand and watch, and he says, no, you're coming in?
Exactly.
Oh.
And then we put on a sterile cap and gown and a mask and gloves, and he was so worried about his sterile field, keeping that surgery sterile. He didn't want to risk his patient.
Definitely, yeah.
And I don't blame him. Here is this brand new nurse on her very first day, student nurse on her very first day, and everything was going along fine until the room started closing in on the sides and darkness kind of overtook me. And I can just remember his voice in my head, don't contaminate the surgery. Don't contaminate the surgery. And I was so worried about where my hands were. I went down, hit the ground.
On your back?
On my back.
Ooh.
And my hands were still in the air. I had my hands bent at the elbow.
You heard his words.
I did. And I must have not been fully out because I kept my hands up. I remember him saying, get her back up here. He did not want me.
No mercy?
No mercy. Well, actually, a lot of mercy. He wanted me to not be afraid. And so he got me back up there, had me hand him things, talked to me about breathing and bending my knees, and performed his surgery and took good care of me. And I finished the surgery.
What did you think after?
I wondered if nursing was for me. But I made it.
Something must have happened after that to keep going.
Well, I went to the floor the next time I was in clinical, the med-surg floor, and that was more a better speed for me. I'm not a surgery nurse.
So you're kind of like if you fall off a bicycle, you just keep riding.
Keep riding. Keep getting up.
And that's good about you. I know that about you.
Oh, well, thank you.
So where did you meet your husband, President Meyer, and what was your first impression of him?
Well, that's a long story.
I'm ready.
Okay. I had a friend, Peggy Myers, who grew up in Orland, and I was helping her figure out what general ed class she needed to finish her major. And we discovered that weather would probably meet her major, the general ed class, to finish her major. So I helped her sign up for a weather class. John signed up for the same weather class, same day, same time. And when they got to that class, they recognized each other because they lived just a mile or so away from each other. And her last name was Myers and his was Meyer. And occasionally, John's family would receive Peggy's family's mail. And he would take it over on his Harley. Well,
Was he a biker type?
no, I think he was just rode a Harley, a small Harley. So they recognized each other and started talking, and Peggy had won a bottle of champagne over the weekend, and she brought that up, and he said, she said, I don't drink that. And he said, well, I'll take it off your hands. And then he asked, why don't you drink it? And she said, because I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Well, she didn't know it, but John, since he was a little boy, had been looking for truth. He'd been looking for a church that was true. And he asked Peggy, do you have anything I can read about your church? Well, that's a dream come true. Who doesn't want to have somebody say,
convert? I mean,
somebody say, can I read something?
Investigator, I mean.
Can I read something about your church? And so the next class, she brought him a bottle of champagne and a Book of Mormon. And he read the Book of Mormon and the bottle of champagne.
He didn't know anything about the word of wisdom then.
No. And we also used to mark the Book of Mormon. So you'd highlight a few verses and it'd say, go to page such and such. And you'd highlight a few verses, go to this next page. And it was a shortcut to reading the entire Book of Mormon. Well, he read that and then started reading the entire Book of Mormon.
Did you mark that, did you say?
I did mark that. I'm the one that marked it for him. And then he said, I've read the Book of Mormon. How can I learn more?
How long did it take him to read the Book of Mormon?
A week.
Wow.
And of course she said yes. I know two men that can help you with that. And
By the name of missionary.
Yes, elder. Yes, elder and elder, right?
Yes.
So he would pick Peggy up at my house because she lived in Orland, and they would go for missionary discussions. So the first time I met him, he had a very pleasant smile, and his countenance just shone. And I thought, I was really impressed. I thought, here he is looking for truth, just like Joseph Smith did. And I knew we'd date at that point.
So you had personal revelation, that you're saying?
Yes, I'll say personal revelation. I'll agree that's what it is.
Yeah.
And our very first date was to a Halloween dance. He doesn't know his date was with me. Peggy had another date. His name was Clee, and then there was John. Both Clee and John thought they were dating Peggy. I don't know who thought they were dating me, but neither one of them. So we all went to a Halloween dance, both thinking...
It was called a group date, maybe, in those days.
Maybe, yeah. I think that we were past group dating, but I'll take it. And then he was baptized on December 12th.
Wow.
And our real first date was December 31st. It was the New Year's Eve dance. And we dated pretty steady until Valentine's Day, and he proposed. So,
well, wait a minute. Did he ask for your hand from your dad? What was that about? I mean...
he did ask for my hand.
Did he?
Yes. He went and met with my father, and,
Did you know anything about that?
I didn't. It was all a surprise to me. So he asked my dad for my hand in marriage, and my dad only had one question. How do you know the church is true? And John explained his whole experience of receiving a testimony, and it was satisfied my father. So John ate at our house probably 6 or 7 nights a week, and he proposed on Valentine's Day. He says I said yes. He says it's documented in his journal. I have yet to see it. I say it took me about 4 months. I was still trying to get to know him and know.
But you knew, so...
Well, I didn't have an answer to a prayer yet that I should marry him. So probably about May, I said yes and started.
What about your mom? What did she?
She thought he was a very nice guy. She really liked him. So he would bring her little presents, flowers, and
get the family.
plants. Yeah. He knew how to win over the mom.
So he brings the ring.
He brought the ring to me. He gave it to me on Valentine's Day, and I didn't wear it. I took it, but I didn't wear it.
What did he say about that?
He said, it's okay. Take your time. He didn't push me.
Aww.
But I said yes in May, and then in June we had stake conference, and he announced our engagement to the entire stake.
Now, was he a speaker at stake conference?
Was.
So he was a speaker. He goes up to the podium.
And talks about his conversion, and as part of his story, he announces that we're engaged.
Oh, what did you go?
Well, I was wearing a ring. I told my family, but I was a little surprised that he announced it to the stake.
In this building?
In this building. He also asked me how many people would be here, and I told him a couple hundred because I didn't want him to be nervous. But
he wanted to make sure everyone knew you were taken.
I guess, but there was a couple thousand here. So
speaking of it, that you were taken, you dated before. Any other prospects before, or maybe that's why John had to announce it?
Yes, I'd been proposed to several times, and
Okay.
I'd always received a no answer.
And this was a good one. Okay.
This was a yes
John
answer.
wanted to make sure that everyone knew.
Yeah. So after that, we were married in St. George. The Oakland Temple was closed. There weren't as many temples. There was Oakland, L.A., St. George, Salt Lake, and Seattle, and maybe Portland. So
And why did you choose St. George?
my parents were married there, and my mother's parents and my mother's mother's parents were married in the St. George Temple in the Rose Room.
A good reason to get married there.
So we traveled to St. George in a blustery January storm with my parents in the backseat of the car, and then drove home with them in the backseat of the car on the day we were married. And then we went back on our honeymoon. They had temple apartments that you could stay in if you did 3 temple sessions a day, and you got to stay there for $9. So we were big spenders, spent $9 a night on our honeymoon for a place to stay, and then we traveled up to Salt Lake City and stayed at the Econo Lodge for about $30 a night. So big spenders, but it provided a wonderful base to our marriage. We attended 19 endowment sessions on our honeymoon.
Wow. Wonderful.
So
Wonderful.
I felt like we had a pretty good foundation to start our marriage out by going to the temple.
Definitely. And had John taken his endowments out before you got married?
No, and neither had I.
Oh, so that was a big awakening, too.
Yeah, so we went and did and performed baptisms the night before we were married. And they kicked us out of the back of the temple when we found out that we had not been through the temple yet in a rainstorm. And we walked around in the rainstorm and then slept in those temple apartments because my aunt and uncle were working in the temple in St. George. And then the next day we received our endowments and were sealed and then drove home.
Beautiful story.
I do want to add one thing. On the way home, John's parents are not members of the church. And we arrived in Chico about Orland about 2 o'clock in the morning because that's where they lived. And my mother said, I think you should call him. I think you should knock on the door. There was no cell phones. I think you should knock on the door and let him know you're married. And I thought, really? Do you think we should do that at 2 o'clock in the morning? And she insisted, and so we did. And his mom was very touched that we would, and his dad, that we would stop and talk to him the day we got married because they couldn't go in the temple, and made an effort to make them part of our day.
Oh, what a beautiful story for that one. Oh. What was your life as a young couple after that?
We house sat for a couple that was retired, and the husband had bought a fifth wheel motorhome as a surprise for his wife because he wanted to travel the country.
Oh.
So we were going to house sit for them, and it was a beautiful house in a country neighborhood, and we were very excited to live in the house. Yes, here in Chico. And as time went on, they sat in the driveway in their motorhome week after week after week.
While you were in the house?
While we were in their house. And they would knock on the door, ask permission to use their washer and dryer, and we would be in their house, in their 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, while they were in their little tiny motorhome. I think they went on 2 very short trips. She hated it. In October, we had signed a year's lease, and so after 10 months, we said, do you want to move back in? And they said, oh, we do. And so we moved out, and they moved in, which was just fine.
How did you find your next house?
We lived in an apartment. We attended Student Ward still because marrieds were there. I was the Relief Society president, and John was the ward executive secretary. And
did you have a lot of support?
Lots of support. We had a wonderful time, and lots of parties, and lots of gatherings, and lots of activities. We had a great time. Life was fun. Life was easy.
What was one of your favorite memories as a young family?
I remember when my kids would take a bath at night and get out of the bathtub, and we'd have these towels that had like a little corner on them, like a hood, and the towel would be behind them, and they would run around the house like they were Superman and Wonder Woman, and like they were capes.
They were capes, so they're flying behind them.
Flying behind them. They'd jump up on a chair and jump down like they were flying, and their arms spread out, and look at me, I'm flying. They just thought that was the most fun. And they would giggle and laugh. That's probably my favorite memory of when they were
How old were they
totally.
at that time?
Oh, Reed was probably 1, 4, 5, somewhere in there.
Aw.
They were just tiny. It was a lot of fun.
Cute little kids. Is there anything people would be surprised to learn about you?
You just don't leave any, you don't want any surprises left unturned, do you?
No.
Oh, all right. Well, I'm the youngest of...
I don't think the audience does either.
Well, I'm the youngest of 6 children. My 5 older siblings are quite a bit older than me. The brother next to me is 13 years older than me, and my oldest brother was 24 when I was born. And I know that my parents were excited when I was born. They were very surprised. The doctor did not think my mother was pregnant. He thought she was having asthma and gave her steroids when he was pregnant with me, which is a real no-no. And all of her siblings came to see if I glowed in the dark and counted my fingers and toes to make sure that I was okay.
Were they happy to have you too?
They were. So let me tell you, my dad wanted to carry me out of the hospital, and the nurse said, no, I have to carry her out of the hospital, the baby out of the hospital. And as soon as we got to the public sidewalk, he said, okay, we're on public ground now. Hand her over. Yeah,
she's mine.
Hand her over. And so I think they were very excited. I definitely felt loved. I'd go out with my siblings, and they were so much older that they would think I was their child, but here we were siblings. I felt like I had 3 dads and 4 moms, so that was a lot of fun. My dad had blepharospasms, which is a spasm of the eyelids, and it would make his eyes drop shut.
How long had he had that?
It started developing when I was probably 9 or 10, and it just got progressively worse.
Is that a common
very
illness?
uncommon? It's only through the male line, so my brothers are at risk for it, but it doesn't go through the female line. We finally found a doctor in San Francisco, Dr. Scott, who injected botulinum toxin around his eyes.
But that was painful.
It was. He was the second person in the whole world to ever have that done. It was experimental. They're using it pretty successfully on cross-eyed children, and blepharospasms, but blepharospasms are not as common. Well, one day we were up, I went with him traveling about to fix machinery. We were up in Greenville, California, and we had to wait till the restaurant closed to work on the equipment.
And that was his
his
current
trade,
employment,
yeah.
his trade?
He'd owned his own business with a couple other members of the church, John Warner and Bart Blair. Well, we finished working on the restaurant equipment about 11:30, and he threw me the keys. I'm 14 and a half. No driver's
What
license.
did you think when he threw you the keys?
I thought we were playing catch, so I threw him back. And he said, "What'd you do that for?" And I said, "Why'd you throw me the keys?" And he said, "You have to drive home. I can't see. I can't get my eyes open."
Had you ever driven before?
Never.
Oh, my goodness.
So I picked up the keys.
And those are windy roads.
They are. I picked up the keys and I got in the car and I said, "Dad, I don't think I can do this." And he goes, "You have to. I can't drive." He goes, "I'm right here beside you. I'll guide the way." And so we started down the road. You can just imagine how fast I was going. Not very fast.
Snail's
yes.
pace?
Snail's pace. And that, you're right, that windy road. He knew the road so well. He could tell me, "Now this turn is coming. So slow down. This is a really sharp turn. You don't have to slow down this much. This one's a wider turn." And he guided me all the way home.
I'm glad maybe that it was at night because I've seen those drop-offs on that road.
It might have scared me to death.
Yes.
I'm glad I hadn't thought about that. You're right. Well, we got home. What should have been an hour and a half or 2-hour trip took 5 hours.
And no cell phones? I bet your mom was
My mom
wondering.
was frantic, but what do you do? We pulled into Chico on the corner of East and Esplanade,
I know the corner.
right by Carl's Jr.
Yes.
And I was going to go straight through that intersection, and a sheriff pulled in the turn lane right beside me. And I freaked out.
Of course.
I'm 14 and a half.
Could you
My
see the steering
pigtails.
wheel?
Yes. And I said, "Dad, there's a sheriff right behind me." And he goes, "I'm here with you. It's all okay.
Aw.
Just act like you know what you're doing." And so I did. I smiled at the sheriff. I turned back to the road. The light turned green, and I inched across the road like a little snail and headed home. We weren't far from home then, and we made it. And my mother was ever so glad to see us. So that's probably what somebody would be surprised to learn, is that I drove at 14 and a half.
And how long did you drive with your dad after that if you had this chronic issue?
A decade or more. I drove him even after I was married. So even after I had children, my mother would watch Staley, and I would drive.
Did you
around.
did you ever have to do some of the work on some of the equipment?
Yes, if his eyes would get bad and he couldn't open them, he would hand me the tool and say, "Now do this," or "Now do that." And I accidentally took some screws off because I turned it the wrong way, and my brother had to go fix it. But, we did pretty good. Few little problems here and there.
What have you done to get yourself through some really hard times?
Everybody has hard times. The biggest thing is to keep faithful, turn to the Savior, and turn to your spouse. I think there's only two choices. You either turn towards the Savior and your spouse, or you turn away. And the way to make it through challenges, because everybody has them, is to turn and work with your spouse and work with the Savior.
Has there ever been a time where you thought, "I don't know if I can do this"?
Several. But one time when Jack was in high school, he's our youngest, he got a concussion right here in this building. He was sitting in seminary, and his chair collapsed, and his head banged against those white brick walls. And
everybody would probably think, "Oh, that's not a big deal. Just shake it off."
Well, he had also hit the metal chair. So he had a bang, bang right here in this building. And he was a little confused and a little dazed. And things weren't great, and I took him to the doctor, and there just wasn't a whole lot to do at that point. But once you get one concussion, it predisposes you to another concussion. And he just received multiple concussions. He received a total of 11 over the course of 4 years. The most severe was when he was working in the yard. He was feeling great. He wanted to help out, and he was driving a T-post in the ground with a T-post driver, and it caught on one of the knobs on the T-post, the driver did, and flipped over and hit him on the head, and it broke 4 teeth, it cracked one of his cervical spine, and created another concussion.
Oh,
And he had
so
horrible
sorry.
symptoms. He couldn't
Everything.
think.
He's like the accident-prone kid.
He was.
Accident-prone.
Well, some of it was playing basketball. He jumped up to get a ball. A kid knocked him to the ground and landed on his head, and you could see his head bounce underneath that kid. And
You must have been so protective of him.
I told
with
him I
this.
was going to wrap his head in bubble wrap, but how could you do that? But we searched all over. We prayed, we searched, we put his name on the prayer rolls. But you have to seek medical care too. So we searched all over. There are neurologists here in town. It was a 6-month appointment away, and I thought, I don't have time for that. So I searched down in Sacramento with a pediatric neurologist, and when I called that pediatric neurologist, she said, the staff said, with a kid and a concussion, we don't make him wait. Be here tomorrow at 10 a.m. And we were.
And see, some people don't know that. They think, okay, they're all right, the concussion. But you searched it out.
I did. Well, he'd had a multitude of impact studies, which is a test for concussion, and he failed them, all of them.
See, and being a nurse, you knew to keep on it, because today it's so hard to get in to see anyone or different opinions, and you just were there, didn't give up.
I tried.
Did you get that as a heavenly revelation to yourself that you need to stay with this?
Oh, yes, I definitely felt pushed. I definitely felt like, don't give up, keep going. And even after we saw the doctor, even though the doctor gave us a very specific medicine regime and action regime of what we should do, the things we should do, it wasn't overnight. Like, she told us to stop all NSAIDs, no Tylenol or Advil, and that we should use Benadryl, and he should be on steroids. And she had a very strict things, no screens. He should be sleeping 20 hours a day. And she told us to...
No iPads, no...
Nothing. And she told us to induce that sleep with Benadryl. And so we did. We followed it to the letter. The 4 hours he was awake, we would feed him.
So under doctor's orders, you had to almost...
sedate him.
Yeah.
Yes. So the 4 hours awake, we'd feed him. He'd do the little homework he had that he could do. And we kept him, homeschooled him during that time. And then we progressed. And next time we saw her, she said, all right, I want you to start playing board games like you did when he was 5 and 6 years old. So
What if you hadn't done that?
I don't know what would have happened. I'm not sure. So we got through it. It just took a long time. I think he probably went to a year or a year and a half total of a 4-year high school degree, but he's gone on. And I wondered and worried what would happen to him. Missing all that school, would he go to college? Could he lead a normal life? But he's
It must have been
married.
so hard.
He has graduated from college. He has a little girl. He supports his family. He's just a remarkable young man. That was a hard time.
Now, another time in your life that is, I want to say, a magic point, a high point, is in 2019. You met with President Nelson and his wife, Wendy, and they came here because of the fire.
They did. So I'm going to back up a little bit. John was sustained the stake president in November of 2017, and in early December, he received a prompt that there would be a severe and disruptive event sometime in his term as stake president. Little did he know it would be the next year, even before the year mark. And so in early November of 18, campfire hit. And every night he would write a report for the Quorum of the 12 that went through Elder Cook and the First Presidency, and write a report of how the saints are doing. And the response was, what can we do? How can we help? And he gave suggestions and ideas, but sometime in early December, he said, maybe somebody could write a paragraph.
So the church was right on this. They were watching communication.
Always, yes. And so he said maybe somebody could write a paragraph of encouragement and support.
Boy,
And,
did everyone need that.
and the result was that President Wendy Nelson came to visit in January. So John told me that somebody was going to come and visit.
Both President and Wendy Nelson, yes.
And I said, well, who? And he said, I can't tell you yet.
It was a secret.
And he said, I have to wait until I'm instructed to. And I said, okay. So I honored that. And one day at work, out at Butte College, he called me and he said, is your door shut? And I said, no. And he said, shut it. And I said, okay. And he said, are you sitting down? And I said, no. And he said, sit down. And I said, okay. And he said,
You said, tell me, right?
Guess who's coming? And I
Hurry.
said, I
Tell
don't
me.
know. And he said, President and Sister Wendy Nelson. I said, are you kidding me? And he said, no. He said, it was so important to President Nelson that the saints know how much they're loved and cared for, that he's making the trip himself. And he had a daughter that was suffering from cancer that he knew was going to pass at some
And didn't
point.
she pass just before he came?
Yes, on the Thursday before he came on
Aw.
Sunday. So part of the story is that we had the opportunity to feed him lunch, but only I was cleared to cook for him. And so I had to come up with a menu of what to cook.
Are you a good cook?
Well, it depends on who you ask, but I do my best. So I asked John, what did they say we could feed him? And they said he loves fruits and vegetables. And I thought, well, we can do soup and salad. It's January. That's a nice thing, soup and salad and some fruit for dessert with chocolate sauce. And I started frantically thinking of what soups because I had the stake presidency and their wives and the whole entourage with President Nelson and Wendy Nelson. And there was a lot of preparation besides that. A group from Salt Lake came out the week before and walked through every step of where we were to meet President and Wendy Nelson. And
It's
where
like
we're,
the Secret Service type thing?
well,
Just
the
wanted to make sure he
LDS
was
Secret
safe.
Service, yes.
Just wanted to make sure he was going to be safe.
Yes, and
Yeah.
that we knew exactly what to do. And so we had all of that preparation, plus there was the cooking, and there was a lot. It was great. I'm not complaining. And he was very specific about music. I almost forgot. So he wanted a specific song sung, It Is Well With My Soul, and Wendy pinned a fourth verse of that song that the choir sang. And we received that music on Thursday before the conference on Sunday, and the choir had to sing that. Well, back to the soup. So I had decided which 4 soups I was going to make and how I was going to make them. And I was pretty settled until one night I woke up in the night about a week before, and a clear thought came to me. Definitely inspiration. Butternut squash soup. And I was wide awake. I thought, butternut squash soup? I've never even made butternut squash soup. And what does it matter? And I couldn't shake that thought. So the next day I started researching butternut squash soup and found a multitude of recipes. And I started cooking butternut squash soup every night for dinner.
How was your family with that?
Well, they got a little tired of it. But I finally found a winner. And the secret ingredient was maple syrup. So there's a little maple syrup in that butternut squash soup. It came time for the day, and the choir sang that beautiful song. We
yes.
greeted them out on the front.
The spirit was so strong here that day.
It really was. Well, we greeted them out there. They were a little ahead of time. We greeted them out in the driveway, and President and Sister Nelson got out of the car, and I was just shaking. And I remember putting my hand out to greet Sister Nelson. I said, Sister Nelson, that's such a... And I didn't even get the rest of my sentence out. She grabbed me and hugged me and said, call me Wendy. We're going to be great friends. And that's how she treated me.
That broke the ice off.
Yeah, like I was a long-lost friend. And that's how she treated us the whole time. And all our travels together, we went up to Paradise, we ate lunch, and we took them to the airport. When it came time for lunch, President Nelson looked around at the soup and ate one serving, and then another serving, and another serving.
Of butternut squash?
Yes, a butternut
We need the
squash.
recipe. You're going to have to put
Happy
it out
to share.
for us.
Happy
Okay.
to share.
Thank you.
And I thought, this is why I was woken up in the middle of the night. It does matter. It mattered. And he had just lost his daughter, and it did matter. And maybe there's some message that I don't know, but the Lord made sure that he
That's what he had.
got what butternut squash soup. And he ate salad and he ate fruit with chocolate sauce, but that butternut squash soup was what he really enjoyed the most. So after that, we took him to the airport, and I remember standing at the airport and Wendy Nelson saying to me, "We're going to be neighbors someday together. Sometime we're going to be neighbors, whether it's in this life or the next." And as his airplane took off, I reflected on how I felt. And it was two paths of how I felt. One is how I felt because the prophet of the Lord came to visit, a prophet that holds all the keys of the priesthood that are on earth today. And what a testimony I gained of him and the keys of the priesthood and the power of the priesthood. And the other one was how they ministered to us, how they made every saint feel, not only when they talked, but when they interacted with the saints. And I thought, I want to minister just like they minister and make every saint feel like the Savior's beside them and ministering to them.
And he shook quite a few hands.
He did.
As he was leaving.
He did.
Yeah,
he did. He ministered to everybody, even though he had just lost his daughter and probably could have used the ministering himself. So it was a life-changing, memorable experience.
For many people.
Yes.
Many people. And he left a blessing from the altar when he was speaking.
He did.
On the podium, I mean.
He did.
And he was speaking to everyone. It's just so uplifting. I can't remember the exact words.
I read it just not long ago, but it blessed us with, pretty much everything that we desired that was righteous.
Oh, Laurie, thank you for the time. Sweet Laurie Meyer.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Well, with this, we'll end on this note. What a beautiful note to end on. And I want to thank all of the viewers that watch this podcast. And we welcome you to watch the next one. And we'll go forward from there. There should be many more after this. Thank you.